Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Understanding New Legal Developments for Public Sector Social Media. My name is Melissa Keene and I'm a Senior Program Manager with the Institute for Local Government and will be your moderator this afternoon. A quick overview of our agenda for today's webinar. We're going to do a quick welcome here and then I'm going to turn it over to our presenters to talk about how social media has implications on the Brown Act, First Amendment, due process, and more. We're going to hear from Riverside County's District Attorney's Office, one of their DAs, as well as their information specialist on how this is actually implemented in local agencies in California. Then we will have some time for Q&A at the end of today's webinar, and then we will wrap up and adjourn by 2 p.m. So you've probably noticed that your line has been muted, and you will remain muted for the duration of today's webinar, but that doesn't mean you can't ask us questions. So you should see a questions box in the control panel of your screen on the right-hand side usually, and feel free to drop questions into that questions box at any point in time. We'll be monitoring that throughout today's webinar, responding as we can, and then we will also make sure to get to as many of those questions as we can towards the Q&A section of today's webinar. And then just want to quickly mention, we are also recording today's webinar, and we will be sending that recording out with the slide deck following the webinar, likely by the end of this week. Just a little bit of information about ILG in case you aren't familiar with us. We are a statewide nonprofit affiliate of the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association. So we essentially provide practical and easy-to-use resources so that local agencies can more effectively implement policies on the ground. We do that in a number of ways. We provide a lot of education and training, such as this webinar, but also through conference sessions and other in-person and virtual trainings. We also provide technical assistance, capacity building, and convening services for local governments statewide. We have 4 main focus areas, the first of which is leadership and governance, which is where this webinar kind of falls under today. So we provide the state-mandated ethics training that local agencies have to comply with, as well as doing a lot of training and resources around effective councils and boards, how to work together as a team, how to increase civility in public meetings, things of that nature. In addition to leadership and governance, we also have focus areas around civics education and workforce, public engagement, and sustainable and resilient communities. So if you're not familiar with this, definitely go to our website, check out all of the free resources and webinars that we have for you all as local government staff and officials. I want to introduce today's presenters. We are joined today by Hongdao Nguyen, who's a partner with our partner, law firm Best & Krieger, Kristen Allison, who's a Deputy District Attorney for Riverside County, and Jaylee Barkley, who's an Information Specialist with the Riverside County DA's office as well. Before I turn it over to Hongdao to get us started, I do want to just provide a quick disclaimer about today's webinar. None of today's webinar should constitute legal advice. We're going to provide you some information about new developments and things of that nature. But if you have explicit legal questions about your agency, please consult with your agency's counsel to get more specific answers to those questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Hongdao. Let me make you the presenter here.
All right. Thank you. Can you confirm you can see my screen? We're good? Okay.
Not yet.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, great. So thank you, everyone.
No, we don't see your screen just yet.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Joe.
Okay. Just let me go ahead and do that one more time. Do you think you can send me that show your screen item one more time?
There we go.
Oh, okay.
No, we see it now.
Okay, great. So I'm going to put up my slides and just let me know if the slides are showing, please.
There you go. You're good to go.
Okay, yay. We did it. I did it. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you to the ILG team for letting Best & Krieger partner with this group. Very pleased to do so. I will be taking the first 20 minutes or so talking about some of the legal landscape for public sector social media. This is our disclaimer, similar to ILG's. A little, quick background on me. I am a city attorney in Southern California. I represent 2 cities, the city of Stanton and Artesia, and support some other Southern California cities. Over the years, I've just kind of developed a real interest in public records and social media and public transparency, which I am happy to share with you today. And here's the overview of my presentation. I know that Jaylee is going to go through a deeper dive on kind of social media, the types of social media. Mine will just be some of the legal aspects of how social media has really permeated not just kind of, people's everyday lives, but certainly public sector lives as well. And then I'm going to go through social media and the Brown Act, the First Amendment, due process, public records, and a slide on records retention. Many of these topics have a lot of depth to them, and given that I have 20 minutes, this is really just some information to help you issue spot. So if something comes up, you can think, oh, I remember that, this came up in this presentation. So we'll just be doing an overview of those items. All right, so straight on to the social media overview. The Supreme Court has really started to take on more of these cases, and they recognize, and I believe the courts and everyone recognize, right, that social media is that modern public square, and it's becoming more and more so. I do a good amount of practice in land use as well, and over the years, as I've worked with planning departments and community development departments, the idea was, your quintessential downtown has kind of either consolidated or, with the suburbs, it's kind of spread out. And especially during COVID, you couldn't even really get out, right? And so where is the discourse happening? Where's more of the discourse and conversation, discussions about big policy issues? Where are they happening? And it's more and more happening in social media. So the Supreme Court has recognized that it's the modern public square. It's a revolutionary space for civic discourse, where we talk about current events, our thoughts, our politics, and all sorts of things. And so that leads us to social media and the Brown Act. A quick overview of the Brown Act. I think that most of the folks in the audience will probably have a good understanding of that, but for those who don't, the Brown Act is the transparency in meetings law. It provides that, government decisions, especially when they happen at a city council level or a board level, has to be done in an open and public meeting. There's notice requirements and agenda requirements. And the idea behind the Brown Act is we don't want decisions being, made behind closed doors where the public can't vet and see how those decisions are being made. So this webinar kind of focuses on the new law. One of those new laws, or newer laws, is AB 992. This became effective in January 1st, 2021, and it addresses what is permitted and prohibited in terms of public official communications on social media. And so the broad legislative history behind AB 992 was that there was, the legislature was hearing from some public officials, and we're talking about council members, board officials, that they were hesitant to engage on social media with their constituents, with other residents, because of a concern that they would violate the Brown Act. And again, when there's a quorum or majority of the legislative body, those decisions, that discussion has to take place at an open meeting. And so the kind of concern was, if I start talking about public agency items on social media, do I violate the Brown Act? So AB 992 addressed that head on. And in the legislative history, it provides that we want public officials to talk to constituents and residents on social media to share information, to discuss items on what they call internet-based social media platforms. That's a defined term, that are open and accessible to the public. And so those are, your platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. All right, and so what AB 992 explicitly allows and permits is a member of a legislative body, such as one council member, may communicate with the public using these internet-based social media platforms, again, Facebook, Twitter, we're starting to talk about TikTok and all these kind of new and future platforms as well, that are open and accessible to the public regarding a matter that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency, which is just a long way of saying agency business, right? So you are permitted, council members and board members, from going onto your social media and soliciting advice from your constituents, giving them information about what is happening in your public agency, and the state specifically passed AB 992 to encourage that. But it was all the state was also mindful of not wanting to violate the Brown Act and still wanting those agency decisions to be done at an open and public meeting. So your board meeting, your council meeting. So there are two prohibitions under AB 992. One is a majority of the members of a legislative body, so a council, for example, may not use this internet-based social media platform such as Facebook to discuss agency business. So 3 of the 5 cannot go on Facebook and have, a real lengthy conversation or a conversation at all about something that might be on tomorrow's agenda. This is not very different from your traditional Brown Act provisions, where the law would not allow 3 council members to get together in a room before the meeting to hash out how they were going to vote before the meeting, right? So this is a prohibition that we understand, and you just kind of take it from that in-person standpoint and you transfer it to the social media standpoint. That prohibition is the same. However, AB 992 took this Brown Act idea a tick further, and it says that one member of the legislative body, so let's say Councilmember A to Councilmember B, may not respond directly to any communication posted or shared by another member regarding agency business on that social media platform, right? So now what we're seeing is Councilmember A it has a Facebook account and a page, and posts about tomorrow's agenda. Councilmember B cannot directly respond. That is a little bit different from the traditional in-person Brown Act violations, because 2 council members on a 5-member body, right, so they don't make up a quorum or a majority, could have lunch together and talk about what's on the agenda. It's only that you get into hot water when you add in that third and create a majority or a quorum. But now AB 992 prohibits those direct responses, and that includes emojis, right? So let's say Councilmember A posts something about agency business, Councilmember B gives it a thumbs up. That is technically a violation under AB 992. So it does go a tick further than your typical Brown Act, traditional Brown Act rules. Okay, so I want to just keep this idea in mind that, with AB 992, the state wanted to encourage public officials to get on and utilize social media. It is a powerful platform, and it is a way to get information to members of the public and get them more engaged. However, there are risks and concerns with doing that, given the prohibitions in AB 992, and in our next few slides where I talk about social media and the First Amendment, right? So we're going to be covering a range. I know the other speakers are also going to be covering public agency social media and best practices as well. And I think the reality is as well that public officials are using their own personal social media platforms, so their own Facebook accounts, right, that the agency isn't necessarily managing, or their own Twitter accounts, and they are, talking about public agency business sometimes. And that can get them into hot water with the First Amendment. And I'm going to go right into the facts of the Garnier versus, it might be Garnier, but Garnier versus O'Connor-Ratcliffe. This is a Ninth Circuit opinion that just came out earlier this summer. There is a writ coming from the trustees to the U.S. Supreme Court asking for the Supreme Court to weigh in on this, but currently this is the law over the Ninth Circuit area. Right, so this has to do with two school board trustees, and they had created campaign pages on social media. So this was pre-election. This was just their own personal Facebook and accounts in order to let folks know, hey, I'm a candidate. Here's what I'm all about. I want to get elected. And lo and behold, both were elected. And what we see is this happens fairly often, where these campaign pages of public officials, once they're elected, kind of ends up morphing into a more public facing page, right? And just for example, there was a case with Donald Trump and his use of his Twitter account. He also had this Twitter account prior to him being elected president of the United States. But once he was elected, it kind of evolved into kind of this public facing social media account, right? So these two school board trustees took those campaign pages, they became elected, and they started posting about, their school district business, happenings on the school district, events, and it morphed a little bit. When there were a couple of parents in the district who were critical of the trustees and particularly critical of the superintendent, and they started posting very repetitive and usually negative comments on these trustees' pages. When I talk about repetitive, so let's say one of the trustees had 40-something in separate posts. One of the parents would post on every single post almost the same comment, whether it related to that comment or the original post or not. And so I believe the trustees basically thought that these parents were trolling them, essentially. And so what they ended up doing, those trustees blocked these parents from commenting. And then, so they either blocked them or they filtered the word usage on the social media account, so it effectively blocked them. The parents sued, and the holding was that there was a First Amendment violation by the trustees on their, formerly personal accounts against these parents who were repetitively posting on their pages. So the analysis behind this is that the trustees acted under the color of state law, and that is just kind of the background of that is, they cloaked these pages, even though they used to be campaign pages, in a more official manner, that they, use their trustee title, they represented themselves as trustees, and, they were posting about official agency business, right? And mind you, under AB 992, this is all okay, right? This is what the state wants public officials to do, is to engage the public on social media. But kind of once they did that, it turned into a public forum, or at least that's what the Ninth Circuit said, that it turned into this public forum where people have First Amendment rights to, their speech, and blocking them and completely prohibiting them from even getting onto their pages violated their First Amendment rights. And the court looked at, it was a very fact-specific analysis. The court looked at those pages and said, it's no longer a personal campaign page. You're not running for office, or you're not, there's no personal disclaimer, but it's turned into this public page. And I think what we want to understand as agency kind of representatives is that because of that, there could be liability put on that public agency, because if they're acting quote unquote under the color of state law, that could potentially be imputed back to the public agency with potential liability. So that's what I worry about at night sometimes. Takeaways from that is just be careful. Social media sites, even from personal accounts, can be transformed into these public forums. It's very fact intensive. A court would look at all the posts and how the person is titled and so on and so forth to try to understand, has this become a public page such that First Amendment rights could be violated. And then I have about 5 more minutes, so I want to go through the next couple of big topic items: social media and due process, right? And again, going back to AB 992, the state is encouraging public officials to get onto social media and communicate with constituents and residents. But again, there's these limitations and these risks that we're talking about. One of them is due process. Board members, council members, there can be items that come before those legislative bodies for which the applicant or the person who's coming in before that body has due process rights, right? The US Constitution, it's enshrined there. It provides that life, liberty, and property can't be taken away without due process. So for example, when someone comes in and says, I want a conditional use permit, and I want to, do this and that with my property, they have a right to notice about that hearing, and a fair hearing. That essentially is kind of the shorthand for due process. And so when public officials are posting on either their own social media accounts or the agency's public social media account, and they're saying, I hate this project, I'll never vote for it, that could be turned around on them during the hearing process, and the applicant can say, you know what, you're not giving me a fair shake, you're biased against my project, and you're violating my due process. So, we want to caution public officials and for the agencies to keep an eye on this and just understand that, the words that are put onto social media can be used against, the agency and the public official as well. And that is most notable in the area of due process. And then there's this thorny issue of Public Records Act, right? Because we know, based on the San Jose case, and this was a California Supreme Court case back in 2017, that basically provides that it doesn't matter where public records reside. They could be in the back of your car, they could be in a filing cabinet, they could be flowing on your not your social media, they could be flowing on the californiacity.gov account, or they could be sitting in someone's private Gmail account. They could be sitting in someone's private Yahoo account. A public record is a public record, right? And they could be subject to disclosure under the California Public Records Act. So that presents that thorny question about, social media posts of public officials on their personal accounts, social media posts on an agency account. Public records can reside on social media accounts. So just be aware that if a Public Records Act request comes in and says, I want all information on this particular agenda item, then a good practice is the agency should be looking on their social media accounts too, to see if there's anything that may be relevant and disclosable. And similarly, if a public agency official has been posting about something on their social media account, then that could potentially be a public record as well. It's kind of dicey sometimes, though. Was it meant to be a public record when it's that person's personal social media account? Or was it really just meant to be a private musing, right? And so here are some of the factors that we look at to try to ascertain and determine whether a record has crossed from the personal realm into the public realm. And we look at the content of the document, the context, purpose, the audience, and scope. And as public records practitioners know, each record is reviewed on a case-by-case basis to make these type of determinations. And then finally, there's, let's say that you've got a public record, it's on a social media account. How long do you have to keep that record, right? So I'm not aware of any statute or law that really talks about social media account records and how long they have to be kept. The Secretary of State of California has weighed in on just some guidance on, what to look at in terms of retention and whether a record should be kept if it's on social media. Does it contain information or evidence concerning an agency's mission or policies? Is the information unique or available elsewhere? Does it contain evidence of official business? Is it a controversial issue? So those are just some guidance in terms of thinking about records retention when they are on social media accounts and social media pages. So that wraps up my slides for today. I'm happy to take questions maybe after the other two presenters, but I hope that gives you some issue spotting tools for the law and social media on these type of issues. And I will hand it back to ILG.
Great, thank you so much, Hong Dao. Really appreciate that information. We have one quick clarifying question I'd like to address before we move on to Kristen's presentation. In the conversation around AB 992, do those restrictions also apply to appointed officials, such as a planning commissioner, or only elected officials?
It's all. So appointed and elected as well. It's just a legislative body, and it doesn't, specify only this type of legislative body or only that one. Certainly, if you take it into the chambers, right? And I always have to think about Brown Act when it comes to an in-person meeting versus something that's happening virtually. Planning commissions are subject to Brown Act, right? So similarly, correct, yeah, provisions would apply to appointed officials as well.
So essentially anybody that would be subject to the Brown Act,
right,
it would extend. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just appreciate that clarification.
Of course.
And then just a quick note to the audience, in case you missed the opening, we are taking questions at any point in time. You should feel free to drop those into the questions box you see on your control panel, and we're tracking all of that, and we'll get to them during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and make Kristen, you the presenter here. You should get prompted to share your screen, hopefully. There we go.
I'm good?
You are good. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Bowie Allison. I'm a deputy DA here in Riverside County. I'm assigned to our in-house counsel unit and our California Public Records Act request unit as well. I am newer to that assignment, but I've been doing in-house counsel for a few years. And so I'm going to be kind of giving more of a micro view on the perspective of how we engage in social media and the laws and the state bar rules that we have to follow from a district attorney office perspective. So I also have a disclaimer. Here it is, that I am not your lawyer. This is just my perspective on behalf of the DA's office, but please don't quote me on any of it. All right, so benefits of social media presence for our office. Like everyone and like Hong Dao was just mentioning, the use of social media is so beneficial if used in the right and correct way, especially in this age where law enforcement is having to fight a battle to show exactly what we do, the positive things that we do, and I think most importantly, to ensure transparency. The more transparent we are, the greater trust that we can, just develop within our community. So those are our, main reasons for participating in it. And we have a very active social media presence, which Jaylee Barkley, who's going to speak right after me, will delve into a little bit more. So typically on social media, the kind of stuff that our office will put on it, this is some of it. The who, what, where, when of a case. The defendant's name and their date of birth and their city of where they're from. Sometimes we include a victim's name. There are lots of prohibitions on that, including if that person, that victim is a sexual assault victim, a domestic violence victim, then we'll refer to them as Jane Doe or John Doe. In our post, we'll describe the crime. We will release any arrest warrant declarations sometimes because those are publicly filed with the court. We will typically include the charges that were filed, the potential exposure, how many years in prison, for instance, a person might receive. And then we can explain the court process and court dates. So I put this up here because there's a lot of things that we can't say. As prosecutors, we are very regulated on what we can and cannot say in the media, and that includes on social media. So this is a hard one because we can't say what our personal opinion is of a defendant or our personal opinion of guilt. So it would be really great to get onto social media and say the Riverside DA's office strongly believes in the guilt of this homicide defendant, but we are prohibited due to state bar laws and other laws from doing so. So if you're ever wondering, this is the kind of stuff we can't ever say. So plea agreement information, confessions and polygraphs, mainly because they're inadmissible in court. We don't include the names of witnesses typically or the credibility of any. Juvenile court matters are almost entirely confidential with some rare exceptions. Grand juries. So as you might know, there are two kinds of grand juries. There's a civil grand jury process that counties have, where you have, in our county, we have an impaneled group that sit for 2 years and serve as the oversight over various agencies and issue reports. Then we have criminal grand juries, which are governed by the penal code, and they are secret proceedings. And so we can't ever mention a grand jury, the fact that it even exists. It's like Fight Club. We don't talk about Fight Club. We don't talk about grand juries. The only time we talk about a grand jury is until after an indictment, which is a charging document, is unsealed. Obviously, if anything is under a gag order, we're not going to talk about it. And anything that could have a substantial likelihood of prejudicing a proceeding, we're not going to discuss either. So that's the bad news. The good news is we can still be extremely active on social media, and I think we have the most Facebook followers of any DA office. I think it's in the country. So generally, the kinds of things that we can post and engage with our constituents with while also following the rules are news releases and case updates. We have a very active fugitive task force that hunts down and arrests homicide defendants. If there's ever any death by a law enforcement member from any jurisdiction, especially in California, we'll talk about that. And then various PSA campaigns. Okay, so we also have hashtag days. Okay, so here's our fentanyl campaign. I just bring that up because I think a lot of people think when they think of district attorney offices, oh, we have one role. We just prosecute cases. Granted, that is the most significant and the most important role, but we have a lot of other ways that we can positively impact our community, and one of those is through public service campaigns, and the one that we are really heavily involved with is our fentanyl campaign, which, as all of us know just from existing in California, fentanyl is a huge killer in our communities. We call them poisonings. We've actually filed, I think, over 24 or almost 24 homicide cases involving dealers of fentanyl, against dealers of fentanyl, because we've had so many deaths related to fentanyl. So we have a whole public service campaign that we we carefully craft and make sure that it complies with all the rules, but it is near and dear to my elected DA, Mike Hestron's heart, for sure. So this is just some of the postings that we have either put on billboards, or most of it has been on social media, because we do have such an impactful social media presence. So now down to the boring rules. We have California State Bar rules that we have to follow here. So that's what I was saying. We're even more limited than most public officials. So we just have to be extra vigilant. One of the rules is that we are prohibited from making statements out of court that we know or reasonably should know are going to be disseminated by means of public communications, that would include social media, or have a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing a proceeding in the matter. This applies to anyone who's working on behalf of the district attorney's office. It's not just the lawyers. So it includes public information officers as well. Another rule, we have to follow a trial publicity ethics rule from the state bar, that an attorney can only state the offense involved, except when it's prohibited by law, the identity of persons involved. Again, that would go back to sex-related cases typically. We can only say information contained in the public record. We are very vague about investigations that are in progress. We'll say almost nothing about them for a variety of reasons, including one of the most important is preserving the integrity of the investigation. We can state the schedule or results of any step of the litigation. This case is set for arraignment. This defendant is set for jury trial. And then a request for assistance in obtaining evidence. We can use social media in order to try to find the answer to that. One more rule. So also under the state bar, Section B permits an attorney to state that a warning of danger concerning the behavior of a person involved when there is a reason to believe that there exists the likelihood of substantial harm to a person or the public, but only to the extent that dissemination by social media, for instance, is reasonably necessary. That's a really narrowly tailored law. So you can see kind of what a short leash we are put on. And when you zoom out, the reasons for that are, we want to ensure from our perspective, as my main ethical duty is to do justice, right? To make sure that the correct people are held accountable. And we want to keep those rights of the accused at the forefront and make sure that that person can receive a fair trial. So if we're out there in the media, social media or otherwise, just going after somebody, whether they're a horrible person or not, that's not our job. Our job is to ensure a fair trial. And then when we ensure a fair trial, we ensure that we'll get justice for our victims, which is our ultimate goal here. And I'm going to quickly move past this one. More laws. I want to talk about one last law. This is very important, especially for all of you on this call. AB 1475, if anybody represents police departments, was enacted and effective January 1st of this year. It prohibits law enforcement from posting on social media some booking photos or photos at all of a person who's been arrested of committing a nonviolent crime. And then on the flip side, it also requires law enforcement to remove some booking photos posted to social media upon request. That, as you can guess, is a very thorny issue based on what you just heard from Hong Dao. So what we've been doing, instead of removing them, you can hide them. That's probably a better option. But this law means that if you've got a guy who or a gal that gets arrested for stealing mail, right? That's a community, that's a problem that will get any community up in arms, right? You just got a guy that's been stealing mail for the last 6 months. You can't post his picture. The only exceptions, you can't post that booking photo, right? The only exception would be if he's a fugitive and there's a concern that he is going to be a danger to the public. The other exception is you get a court order. And then the other way you would be able to post it would be an extraordinary circumstance, which of course isn't defined. So it's vague, but be very careful about what law enforcement officers are posting on nonviolent crimes. And nonviolent is a term of art. It's defined in the penal code. If you have any questions about that, this is an evolving law. And then I'm going to end on, so the Turpin case, you've probably heard of it. It was a terrible, horrible case that happened here in Riverside County, and it received a tremendous amount of media attention. We had social media postings about it. We were able to to divulge lots of information about that. And we were able to do that based on the exceptions that I just went through of where we're trying to, basically there's an extraordinary circumstance. And our extraordinary circumstance is we would always include a tip line because we wanted to know if anyone could help in the investigation, if there were other victims out there. So this is a catch-all for something that, and it was certainly in the public interest for people to hear about this case once it was resolved. So if you always zoom back out and can get to the public interest and can find a way to say that it's an extraordinary circumstance, that's also a way to provide more information to the public and to ensure transparency. And with that, I'm gonna finish up. I went 5 minutes too long, sorry, and hand it to Jaylee.
No, great information. Thank you for sharing the county perspective here. Up next, we're going to turn it over to Jaylee, who runs the social media for Riverside County's DA's office and can talk a little bit more about the application of some of these laws and how she, as an information specialist, handles some of these kind of thorny issues. So Jaylee, I'm going to go ahead and give you the presenter permissions, I think. There we go.
Can you all hear me pretty good?
I can hear you and I can see your presentation.
Awesome. All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Jaylee Barkley, and I'm one of the information specialists here with the District Attorney's Office in Riverside County. Some of my duties include community outreach, the great stuff, public relations, social media, and cultural involvement for our office. And today I will be essentially going through some of the mechanisms that we use in order to still have a positive, interactive, and overall fun interaction on social media. So that's why I called my portion of the presentation, How to Post Like You're Supposed to. So just a couple facts about how social media's impact has kind of occurred here recently, for sure. As you can see, nearly half the population, more than half the population, has an account on social media. Now, whether that's duplicate accounts or people under different identities who have accounts, I'm not quite sure about that. But nonetheless, this kind of gives you an indicator about how many people actually go on social media and engage social media themselves. Another interesting fact is that Facebook is still widely renowned as the social media juggernaut when it comes to platforms. They are the most heavily used, they're definitely the most visible, and people use Facebook for a myriad of different reasons, from marketing to just personal interactions and communications within their own social groups. Now, the age breakdown and demographics can be a little bit interesting, especially because I think most people kind of have a vision of what a social media user looks like. Some young person, some kid, some teenage person who is super on social media and heavily involved in either doing trendy videos and things of that sort. But one thing that's important is that to know is that the bulk of the users are definitely folks who are between the ages of 18 and 29, so adult folks, right? And the great thing about that is that that group of people are usually the groups who have the most influence when it comes to their social involvement and environments. And they're also the people who are going to rely on social media for more information that could be widely disseminated. Another interesting fact, which I found surprising, because I'm sure that I spend definitely 3 times that on any given day on social media, is that the average person is on social media about 2 hours and almost 30 minutes a day. And so if you think about it, for some of us, that's a quarter of our workday. So if you can engage people for that long and get whatever content or information you'd like to them, that could be very impactful. Another awesome avenue for social media is it's widely and heavily used for marketing. The ability to reach a certain demographic or get information to someone for a specific purpose is really, really, really impactful to your agency, and could be when it comes to some major topic that you would like to talk about or something that you would like to get people rallied around. Another thing is that social media has become the new Google. And I say that because oftentimes you can go to any social media platform and in the search, type in whatever topic you'd like to, and you get a myriad of different responses and information about that topic. And the cool part about that for some is that you can get public opinion about that product or about that subject from active users. And so word of mouth is a very, very big component of being able to use social media to get information about a specific subject or something you're interested in learning more about. Another interesting fact is that people generally view social media as positive and that they enjoy or have positive engagement and interaction with social media platforms. The great thing about that is because there are so many different social media platforms to choose from, everything from Instagram to TikTok, even Snapchat, people have opportunities to engage social media in different ways. You might know of a couple of people who might use Facebook for just family connection, but Instagram to promote products, or Snapchat so that people can stay aware or informed of how their day is going. So because you can kind of compartmentalize what your life looks like across these different social media platforms, it's a cool way for you to be able to control how your interaction happens on those social media platforms. And it could definitely turn out to be a very, very positive engagement when you do so. 49% of consumers claim that they depend on influencer recommendations. Now, this is very important because if you have half of social media who says that they do go, see, engage, purchase, or get involved in something because they were able to utilize the influence of who is present or prevalent on that social media platform, that can be really important, especially if you have someone who is very impactful or that people respect, or in some cases, people just lean on for entertainment and are just excited to see that person on their social media platform. That could be huge for your impact as an agency when you're using your own social media. Another cool thing, and that I think people don't often realize, is using the short-term aspects of social media to be able to reach out to folks. And one of those ways are Instagram stories. So if you're familiar with the platform, there are a couple of different components to it, two of which would be your ability to post directly on your page, and then your ability to use your short-term opportunity, which is a day or 24-hour time span, to also push content on your social media platform. I'll talk a little bit more about that as the presentation starts to go along. But that's really important because if you have 150 million people in January, then jump to 500 million people, January 2027 to January 2017 to January 2019, that is significant. That means that people are definitely interested in getting short-term information. They might not have time to scroll through a whole social media platform, and they just want to see what's going on at that moment. You can use that definitely to your advantage. And last but not least, 91% of social media users access social channels via mobile devices. So the great thing about that is, because they have these different opportunities to look into what social media is, what that poster is talking about for that day, or even what that page represents, that's a huge amount of people who are using that outlet for their content and for their information. And so that could be valuable to you as well. So with all that being said, all of those statistics and how we know that the public is using social media, you might be asking yourself, well, what am I supposed to do with this information? How is this going to impact me, right? One great thing that we were able to do with our team is establish our who's, what's, when's, where's, why's, and how's. Okay, and we started with who is our target audience. Now, this is going to be important because you want to cater your content toward those who you are looking to engage your content. Okay, you can't be in a situation where you're talking about apples and oranges, but all of your content is talking about burgers and fries. So if you want to reach those apples and or just folks, you want to make sure that you establish that your target audience is going to be this specific group of people, or it could be as broad as anyone ages 18 to 29, obviously, because of that huge demographic that we read in the statistics who's actually engaging social media on a regular basis. What do you want to say to them? What part of your agency's happenstances are you interested in making your audience or the public aware of? Okay. When do you want to say it? Do you want to be an occasional poster? Would you like to be a daily poster, like how our office is? Generally, we push out content over our platforms on a daily basis. And so we do that for a matter of making sure that we stay prevalent and that we engage our audience on a regular basis. But some people use it a little bit more sparingly. Sometimes you might want to do it for agency updates. Sometimes you might want to use it for cultural awareness months or things of that sort. So you might want to establish when your frequency or what your frequency will be on your social media platforms. And then you want to talk about where. Because there are so many different social media platforms, you might want to investigate which platform will help kind of push your content in a way that you'd like it to do. And that's because all platforms don't operate the same. They have some similarities, but generally their functionality is pretty different. And so do you want an experience where you might want to utilize Facebook because it's widely known as a place where people kind of get comfortable in and use on a regular basis for more content enriched information? Or do you want to just capture their attention for a short period of time like you would with TikTok and have them move on, but do that in a way that who you're connecting with on that platform will be able to use it to their advantage? So you're definitely going to want to consider that. And then you want to talk about why social media is important to you. I just gave you a bunch of statistics for its effectiveness and how it can be utilized to your advantage. But then you have to talk about what is the importance of your role on social media going to be. And that's important because it is a public platform. And because of that, you want to make sure that the things that you're putting on there are things that you can stand behind and that are really important to your agency. And then how do you want to connect with them? In what way? Do you want your audience to be entertained by your content? Do you want them to be informed? Do you want them to be educated? And I know from our communications department standpoint, we use all three. And the reason why information, education, excuse me, and entertainment are important in content creation is because it helps guide you for what type of topics you want to post and display on your social media platforms. So then we'll talk about the great stuff, which are platform terms and conditions, policies, and procedures. So these are important because they are going to help guide you on how you and your content users are able to use the platform. Now, I use this example from Meta or Facebook because they have a very enriched terms and conditions, privacy policy, and community standard page that lies out all of the different ways that they would like for their users to be able to engage their platform. Now, this is important because they also govern and police the platforms according to these terms and conditions, policies, and procedures. And that's going to be helpful for you because when you create your content, you want to make sure that you are in line with how those policies, procedures, and terms and conditions work. Now, that's also important for your content users because if you get in situations where the people who you are engaging start to get a little unruly or the content or comment section starts to get a little awry, you can use the platform terms and conditions, policies, and procedures to essentially respond effectively on your comment sections and in some cases, be able to take action on certain comments that do not meet the terms, conditions, policies, and procedures. Also, using the foundation of some of the content platforms, terms, conditions, policies, and procedures can help you better craft what your own terms and conditions, policies, and procedures will look like. And you'll want to establish them for your agency if you're going to be engaging in social media, because there might be something that was not covered under the platform's terms that you would like for your public users and all of your folks who engage your platforms to be aware of and to abide by as well. on our Facebook pages and on our Instagram pages, our terms and conditions are one of the first things that you see when you go to our Facebook and Instagram platforms. And I put an example of them here on this slideshow. Now, the reason why that's important is because your terms and conditions and the platform's terms and conditions can work in conjunction to make sure that people who are interacting with your platforms are doing so in a manner that meets those requirements. And it also can be your justification or your validation to take action when someone does not abide by them. So those are extremely important. All of the things that Hung Dao and Kristen mentioned in their presentation about how the law impacts you as an entity, and then obviously how you are going to engage your social media, all kind of come to a head when it comes to your ability to put your content on there and police and really be able to monitor your social media platforms. So we also have terms and conditions, policies and procedures that we have created in-house, not just for our social media engagers out in the public, but also folks inside of our office, okay? One of the most important ones is making sure that we are able to closely monitor who from our office is placing information on social media platforms. Now, we have a bunch of different divisions here at the Riverside County District Attorney's Office, and some of which have their own social media pages. Two that come to mind are our canine Rachel, who is a court support canine, and we also have a page for canine Chewy, who is a electronic scent detection dog with our bureau. And so whenever one of our divisions or someone within our office wants to establish their own social media presence, we make sure that we do so in a way that's cohesive and essentially even across all boards, that we're all on the same page about how we want to use our platforms. And then from there, as things arise, like in this situation, the social media authorization form or an addendum to what we initially put out for our social media account request form. There has also been an addendum to include different things like media releases for minors so that we're able to put out photos, making sure that the presentation of the social media platform is in line with how our office would like for the presentation to be. All of those things matter when it comes to how your different entities, if you're going to have a multitude of different divisions or departments on social media, have a presence so that you can kind of be uniformed. This is another addendum that we added, and all of these attachments are included on this webinar, so you'll be able to access them for reference. Now, once you get past all of the parameters of the who, what, whens, and what you're allowed to do versus what you can do, you then want to talk about building your team. And this step process has been really helpful for us because we've had opportunities to tap into different skill sets whenever we are trying to create content and publish information on our social media platforms. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we do that in this portion of the presentation. What's also important is being able to create content and solicit participation. Now, the great thing is you absolutely want to make sure that you tap into whatever resources you have within your immediate vicinity. So you want to invite everyone, of course, in accordance to what the topic is, to participate. You'll also want to make sure you knock on familiar doors. And what I mean by that is using your team, using some of the relationships that you have in the office to be able to ask them to kind of come alongside you and create some of this awesome content that you've spent so much time brainstorming about. You want to talk to your teammates, like I mentioned before. You want to ask maybe some of your closest colleagues, or maybe even within your own divisions, people that you have relationships with, to participate in some of the different campaigns and other social media opportunities that you're creating. Sometimes when those wells run dry, you might have to break out the big guns. Now, like I mentioned on this slide here, that absolutely is not my favorite option, because you want people to participate because they're interested in the topic and they want to do it. You don't want them to receive an email from their manager saying, hey, did you see that a request by the communications team to participate? You don't want to do that because the nudges sometimes feel a little bit voluntold-y. I just made that word up, I think. And you definitely want people who are going to be motivated to participate on their own accord. Next, you want to talk about or utilize previous campaigns. Maybe you've created some things in-house that could be helpful for you to be able to use in order to draw folks into future content and future projects that you might be putting together. And so the great thing about that is that people kind of get an idea of what's been done before. They have an idea of how they could present, and sometimes that could help aid in some of the concerns or maybe even the jitters people might have for wanting to participate. Next, you want to not just knock on a familiar door one time, but you might want to go back to the well a couple times, especially if that experience was really, really, really cool and they had a good time doing it. And so you might want to ask someone or invite someone back for a future opportunity or a future project, and don't feel weird about that. They'll definitely let you know if the well has run dry. What is also important is utilizing your content participants to advertise the project that you just created with them. Now, if they're willing to champion it because they feel proud about it, they like the way that they present it, the more likely they are to promote it. And that's going to help with your viewership, your clickability, and also your ability to draw other participants in at future opportunities. And lastly, you want to make sure that you prepare yourself to not have as much participation as you thought you would. I know in some of the projects that I've participated in, I've told myself, this is going to be great. You're going to want to be a part of this. Everyone is going to enjoy it. And then I get no draw. And that's okay. The thing is that whenever, unless you're voluntold, whenever you're doing projects, sometimes they could be projects that people are volunteering their time for. And if they don't feel like volunteering their time, that's fine. But that is not an indication of how you've recruited or who you've reached out to. So don't be so hard on yourself. So now we'll talk a little bit about the diversification of posting platforms and how they might differ according to the different social media entities. So this is our social media features portion, and generally this involves other members of our media team. In this case, that would be Patrick Stevens, who is our videographer and has some other roles here in our office, and also Devin Michaels, who's our graphic designer. And usually if we're going to do a social media feature, it's likely going to be something that is going to be memorialized on our social media page. And we're interested in getting public feedback and interaction on those pages. So these are people who are liking the post, who are commenting, and these are also people who we are responding to and having an interactive experience with. And so I'll show you some examples of what that could look like next.
For me, Black history means giving the future generation hope. It's about announcing to the world we are here, and there are so many different things that we can do if we're just given the opportunity to do it. My name is Kamaria Henry. I'm a managing deputy district attorney, and I work at the Riverside County District Attorney's Office.
Kamaria was actually the first Black attorney manager in the history of our office. My name is John Henry. I'm a Chief Deputy District Attorney here at the Riverside County District Attorney's Office.
Actually, my husband is the first Black Chief Deputy District Attorney in the history of the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. My father was in the military, so I grew up as a military brat. By the time we settled in California, I graduated from Etiwanda High School and went to UCLA. Go Bruins, always.
I grew up in West Covina. Both my parents were police officers. I knew that I wanted to be an attorney. I've been a prosecutor really since I was 3 years old. Kamaria and I met in law school. We actually didn't start dating until we were both with the LA County DA's office after law school.
If someone would have told me that when I met him, he would be my husband, I never would have believed it. But here we are a little over 20 years later.
We both left LA County on the same day and started working here in Riverside on the same day also.
I absolutely love working with John. It is really comforting to have someone so close to me who understands the intricacies of what I do.
The thing that I like about it is you always know that there's someone there in the office that has your best interest at heart and that will be honest with you for better or worse. They also will tell you if you're right, if you're being crazy, if you're barking at the moon. So that part of it's very comforting.
And then next I'll show you this one.
Hi, my name is Yolanda Cruz. I'm a victim service specialist from the District Attorney's Office in Riverside.
And I'm Carlos Vanagas, Chief Deputy District Attorney here in Riverside County.
I prepare mofongo that you create it in different kind of ways with chicharrones, with shrimp, or any kind of meat.
Wow, this is a close call, but I'm going to say salsa. It's a wonderful combination of all the people that have contributed to Puerto Rican society, our Afro influences, our indigenous influences, and a touch of European. And I dare anybody in the world to listen to some salsa and not start moving.
And I agree with you, Carlos. I enjoy salsa the same way, but I respect the bomba.
Absolutely.
That's come from way back in our traditions.
100%. Puerto Rico has beautiful beaches, but I think at Yunque would be my choice. Tropical rainforest, beautiful waterfalls and hiking, and the only rainforest in the U.S. National Forest System.
It means being recognized.
Yes, it definitely means recognition to me as well, and the pride of being from a region, the Caribbean, and specifically an island, Puerto Rico, that has contributed so much to this country, and so much to the world. We're small, but I think we're very mighty.
And so the cool thing about those features is that both Devin and Patrick tend to use Adobe products to produce those. And they tend to be short, but they are also very entertaining, and people seem to enjoy them when they see them on our social media platforms. Then next, we have our blogs, which are cool because they allow for people who are traditional information users, whether they might be more predisposed to still read newspapers or do more reading types of informational engagement, to still be involved in the things that we do here at the office. We also use our social media platforms to promote our blogs. And so you'll see, in this case, this was a feature on Natasha Crawford, who is the very first, not just woman, but Latina to be an assistant chief of our bureau. And then we have one of our attorneys, which is Sophia Chow, who is the first Asian descendant of Asian person of Asian descent who was the president of the California Bar Association. So we featured her for AAPI, which was a really cool opportunity as well. And he's just used Microsoft Word, he just types it up and tends to post it to our blog library, which can be found on our website. And then we have our social media stories, which, like I mentioned during the statistics, have a very short time where they are published. And so that might be more comforting to some of your colleagues to be able to participate, that, hey, it doesn't stay up there for very long, so that's good. And they also are ideal for capturing people who just like to scroll occasionally. And the cool thing is that they also can be archived. And so I'll show you a couple of those short examples here.
Hey, Jaylee, while this example is running, I just also want to do a quick time check with you. I want to make sure we still have some time for questions. So if we could wrap up in a couple minutes, that'd be fantastic.
Great, thank you. And then I'll kind of talk through this one as it's playing. But this is an example of one of the programs that we use, which is a Play program. And it's very functional, super easy to utilize, and it puts out a production that's really cool and looks very professional. And then last but not least, we have TikTok. TikTok is the latest addition to our social media platform presence. The great thing about it is it's very, very casual. So it doesn't have a very formal kind of feel like all the other platforms do. And the great thing about it is you can do something very, very short, but still be content enriched. And here are a couple of examples of that also. Oh, it didn't look like those played. I apologize for that. But in the interest of time, I just want to let you know that when it's all said and done, you're definitely going to want to take advantage of people reviewing your content. This is a photo of our director, who we send all of our social media content for feedback and for revision information, and it helps us along the way, definitely. And here are some of the comments that we've had on some of the features that we've done. And this is why we do it. We do it because we want to make sure that our users have a positive engagement, that they feel connected to our office on a more personal level, and that they come alongside us when it comes to the work that we do and why we do it. So these are the social media platforms that our office has accounts on. We're also on Nextdoor and YouTube, so feel free to follow us on social media. And that's it for me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jaylee. Ask all of our presenters to come back on camera. We'll go into our Q&A. I will also take back the presenter. Okay. Great. Thank you all for your presentations and insight into this. And we know it's a ever-changing space, both on the technology side of things and on the legal side of things. So really appreciate everybody's thoughts on this. We do have a number of questions that have come in. Well, we'll get to as many of these as we can, and please still feel free to continue to add questions into the questions box, and we can also address things after the fact if needed. So we've got a couple of clarifying questions, I think, going back to earlier in our presentation. The first question is there a standard definition of agency business? So as it relates to I think mainly Hung Dao related to your presentation about the Brown Act considerations and things like that. Is there a legal definition or a standard definition of what agency business constitutes, or is that something they need to chat with their counsel about?
Unfortunately, I think this is something that they need to chat with their legal counsel about. I'm kind of going deeper in my memory about when AB 992 first came out, and I think that was a question that came up. What is subject matter jurisdiction of a public agency? And if I recall correctly, it wasn't defined in the Brown Act. And so, we've had to be broad enough. So certainly anything that is going to appear on an agency agenda or something in which the agency will have an expenditure on. So if you're committing finances to anything or potentially going to commit finances to something, then I think those are kind of the no-brainer items. Agency events, So those are kind of the broad categories. And, you know, I'm not aware of any statutory definition for that.
Okay. Yeah, so it might be good to follow up with your internal counsel on that front, but definitely some guidance there in terms of anything that's going to be on an official council meeting or commission meeting that's agendized, things like that. Also, another kind of nuanced clarification on AB 992. What is there a bright line rule in terms of local officials being able to use social media as long as they're not interacting with each other? So essentially, could multiple members of the same council or commission or board be posting about something as long as they're not commenting on each other's posts or liking or sharing each other's posts? So if they're individual, does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think if it's an issue where, you know, let's say each council member had their own personal, you know, Facebook page, and they were, you know, let's say that they're all in different districts, right? And district 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're all soliciting information from each of their districts, and giving information to their constituents of there's an event happening in this district, or in the city, then I absolutely think that's fine. It's really when they start commenting on each other's posts, and either one coming into a discussion or responding directly to each other. But the really interesting thing for me is how the legal issues start to bleed over each other, where yes, you know, we want public officials using social media and to educate, you know, their constituents, but at the same time, like the more posts you have on your personal account for a public official, the more likely that someone could say, you're violating my First Amendment and you blocked me, or you delete my comment, or, you know, whatever that may be. So I kind of see it as a double-edged sword, and I love Jaylee's presentation, all the wonderful things you could do on social media for public officials. There's just added element of risk to it. And sorry,
so mainly
yeah, and I don't want, you know, public agencies to think that the First Amendment issues only happen on a public official's personal account that transforms into the public account. Certainly those First Amendment issues can arise on an agency's social media account as well.
So mainly be very careful about the interaction. That was, I think, how I'm interpreting. Yes. Okay. So you just mentioned something that's also come up in the questions around belligerent comments or profanity, or things like that. And I know a number of agencies have internal social media policies that can help them navigate those waters. Any suggestions or guidance there? Would it be that they should embark on creating an internal social media policy that would allow them to work through some of that, or what thoughts do you guys have? Or maybe Riverside, how do you handle that when that situation arises?
I certainly recommend that everyone who is utilizing social media have a social media internal policy, for sure. That's gone all the way up your chain of command. I think it's also important to let, you know, because the people posting aren't always your elected or, you know, those people. So sometimes they'll pop on there and you're elected, or somebody higher up in your chain who hasn't been briefed on the nuance that we have is going to do something you don't want. So make sure everybody knows the rules going forward. How we handle those negative comments, I think, and Jaylee can correct me if I'm wrong, is we hide them. We don't delete them. And I think we keep a log if we do end up deleting. Is that right?
Yeah, in a similar fashion, the actual platform also polices the comment section. So there will be words that they kind of get flags about or alerts that happen in the comment section that them themselves, without our office intervening or having to enforce our internal policies and procedures, violate the platform's terms and conditions and policies and procedures. And so they'll take the initiative to go and police the comment section. So it's a multi-pronged effort, but you definitely want to make sure that you have an internal policy so that you can cover the bases from your vantage point.
And just echoing on those comments, having a policy is so important. You know, in the Garney case that I cited in my presentation about First Amendment, the court said, hey, these trustees didn't have a policy. So it was really unclear why you were taking someone's post down or why you were deleting it. And that's true of the public agency as well. It is, for me, it is a case-by-case basis and very contextual, So for example, one of our agencies had a post that said nothing unrelated, right? So if there's a post and you post a comment that's unrelated, then we're gonna hide it, delete it, block it, or whatever. One of my agencies took a very, a controversial stance on a topic, and someone talked about in the comments, that's something that seemed kind of tangential to it, but in someone's mind, it could be related, so it's just a real fine line to walk when you're doing that. And the thing with, all social media for public agencies, whether it's, an agency one or a public official one that's turned into a public one, you can have viewpoint discrimination. So you can't have one, all the comments that are positive, let them stay on, but like, oh, those are all negative, so let's hide it. Like, that is the one kind of golden rule in social media. Like, you cannot, in public agencies, you can't viewpoint discriminate.
Yeah, so be careful of things that are more subjective in some of your policies. Any advice or any suggestions on where to start? So if an agency doesn't have a social media policy currently, is there a good place to start that conversation, or any ways to navigate that? We have some samples on our website of agencies that have shared theirs with us that you might be able to review, but anybody on the line have any suggestions on where to start there?
I can kind of answer to that, since we have our new platform, which is TikTok. And TikTok for us was a slow process to start because of all of the red flags that kind of came up about the platform itself, how it's a foreign based social media platform, how protections of information and all that kind of great stuff were a couple of concerns. But we went ahead and still created an account for the platform. And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to make sure that we diversified our messaging and we presented in a way that isn't so redundant like it is on our Facebook and our Instagram and our YouTube and all the other channels that we have. And so this gives viewers and maybe a different user base an opportunity to see us in a different light. And so we had to establish our purpose. Why do we want to be on TikTok? And for some of the reasons that I mentioned to you now, is some of the foundational work that we did in order to establish our account. So we knew that we didn't want the same content on our TikTok page as we had on our previous platforms. And so maybe that's a point that agencies want to look at, is for what purpose do you want to use each platform? And because TikTok is a very casual platform and we are a professional entity, how do we stay in line with the parameters and the functionality of that platform, but still are able to retain our identity and be successful in our postage? And so those are some of the things that you want to consider whenever you're thinking about establishing a social media account, is what you're using the platform for and how it's going to fit in who your identity is.
Senator Hongdow, anything to add? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think there's a lot of social media policies floating around. I mean, I think, social agencies have been using social media for a while. A lot of them kind of blend into me now, but I think there's work done at the beginning and kind of the end. So all that work into the policy and getting the purpose and the intent, who's your audience? Do you want to allow people to comment? Do you want to close them off? Here are the reasons why, we would either hide or block or delete something. That's kind of at the front end, and then kind of monitoring those comments. That's at the back end, for me at least, where that's when the city staff would come to me and say, well, look at what just popped up on our social media. What do you think we should do? So that's how it comes to me, in kind of the front end and the back end.
And even just to make another point, along with what Hung Dao just mentioned, we at the Riverside County District Attorney's Office have a different presentation to our public, because we have what I call the trifecta. which we are public servants, we are law enforcement, and we also work for an elected official. And so as many would see that to be a barrier to how they create content, we use those different vantage points to figure out what we can do. And although there are sensitivities obviously associated with each of those affiliations, that shouldn't stop you from getting together with your teams and putting together content that you feel like will be really relatable to the public and really reflect who you are as an agency.
Great. You raised something that has kind of come up in the questions and comments, and so just curious from your perspective, or if there's any good rule of thumb here, when do you raise things up the chain? So Jaylee, in your case, when do you get the lawyers involved, essentially? So you have your internal social media policy and you know the bright lines there, but at what point in time are you like, hey, I really need some advice here?
Sure. If we have any questions about content, that's definitely one avenue that we want to reach out to Kristen and her team over in our in-house counsel to make sure that even is it appropriate to be presented on our social media pages? Does it make sense? As far as the usability of the platforms, the comment sections, we make sure that we look for any comments that could be violent or where people are making threats, and we make sure that we assess that in a very safety-oriented way. And so if we have anything like that occurs, we make sure that we send those up the chain to say, hey, this is something that's going on in the comments section. What do you all think about that? Generally, a lot of the content that we have, when we stay within the parameters of education, information, and entertainment, don't seep out to that escalating factor. But if there is an occasion where there might be an incident that involves an elected official, or there might be something that we have as a result of a case that pertains to our office, then you definitely want to get your counsel involved so that you can know the best way to move forward.
Perfect, thank you. Kristen or Hong Dao, anything to add to that? Anytime you wish people would involve the attorneys, anything like that?
You know, for me, I feel like the city folks that I work with, they know when, hey, something's a little bit off here, or this person is repetitively, you know, posting. Sometimes it's the public officials themselves who say, hey, you know, what about this post? This is kind of off the wall here. So, I mean, I think it's important for, you know, whoever is administering the social media, like Jaylee, who's kind of overseeing it, kind of be trained on that to that level, and those things will kind of naturally bubble up. It's kind of my experience that when something comes up and someone doesn't like it, we'll hear about it.
Yeah, trust your gut. When you start going around to different people in your office asking them, hey, what do you think about this? Or I'm worried about that. By the time you get to that second or third person, that probably means you should go talk to a lawyer or your supervisor or somebody like that. Yeah, trust your gut in these. Of course, anything high profile, anything in the media that's, you know, being discussed in, you know, national news, anything like that, you know, communication is key. You want to make sure that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. Depending on how large your agency is, you know, you might work in a different office than where everybody else is. And so, or you're working remotely. So it's always better to ask, I think.
That's always my advice as a non-attorney, is to consult with your agency counsel.
Yeah,
when in doubt.
Is, hey, thanks for asking. You're good to go. Go, you know, go, you do you.
Yeah. Perfect. All right, let's do a quick time check. It looks like we are at 2 o'clock. So I just want to share a few follow-up items, some additional resources from ILG. We have a number of resources on public engagement, and so we know that social media is also an engagement tool. So you can reference us on that front. We also have a number of leadership resources. We just did an article for Western City Magazine for the League of California Cities on social media use. So a number of things there. Definitely check out our website. If you're interested in keeping up with us or attending additional trainings or conference sessions or webinars, these are our social media platforms, as well as our newsletter. We have Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with us those ways. As I mentioned, we will be sharing some materials from this webinar after the fact, so stay tuned for that. And then just want to share our contact information in case we didn't get to your question or anything comes up later. Please feel free to reach out to us. I just do want to thank all of my presenters this afternoon, Hongdao, Kristen, Jaylee. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences and expertise with us and all of the attendees on the line. And thank you to the attendees for joining us this afternoon. Hongdao, Kristen, Jaylee, any final thoughts or remarks?
Nothing final for me except for thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure. So thank you so much.
Yes, and I just want to add, I apologize for not being able to play those TikToks, but if you have TikTok and you would like to check them out, they are on our page, so feel free.
Thank you. I'm good. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon.